This tape on body mechanics is designed to help each of us as Weiqi practitioners learn to be attentive to all of the subtleties and the interrelationships of movements within the body in practicing karate. It's also designed, inevitably, to help one develop power in one's movement through the activity of intending to move with great clarity and with great power. There's a long history of conceptualization in terms of how the body is used that goes all the way back to China. Chinese martial arts have often talked about three areas that are important in body mechanics, and that is the relationship between form, function, and feeling. We know those three as a possible interpretation of three conflicts. How do we create good form, at the same time pay attention to the feeling, and be able to make the movements work in a very powerful fashion? When we talk about body mechanics, the first and most important aspect of developing a relationship with the body is paying attention to it. By paying attention, what I mean is, sure, we learn the gross movements of the kata, of the coordination exercises, or hojuendo. We learn how to move in relationship to a partner, training partner, or an attacker for self-defense purposes or for fighting purposes. But paying attention means going into the feeling of all the subtleties and interrelationship of subtleties within the body. Throughout this tape, I will be asking you to pay attention. As I do so, we will be developing the second most important relationship to developing strength in our karate, and that is to develop intention. So there are the two, as I described, intentions: attention and intention. I would like to start with taking one of the pairs of concepts, one of coiling and that of uncoiling. Get into a right sanchen. Feel how the stance is naturally a coiled stance by having the hips tucked under, the thighs are naturally engaged. One doesn't really have to flex the thighs in order to have a natural spring-like strength within the legs. Simply by rotating the pelvis forward to the proper degree, the legs are engaged. So the position itself is coiled. Now, what I would like to have each of you do is turn the right hip slightly into the right foot. Feel how the coiling actually increases by rotating the hip in the sanchen position. Now, having said that, there becomes a place where the spring becomes overwound. And the idea of this particular work is not to exaggerate, but to explore the subtleties of relationship. Find the place where the spring is wound tightly, where the coiling occurs most beneficially, and then go past it. And you can feel now how the stance is weakened. The forward foot wants to pull off of the floor at that particular point. That is over-coiling. If you find a place where the foot is still satisfactorily on the ground, but there is the maximum degree of coiling, that's approximately right. So it's subtle. It's about the rotation of a hip into the direction of the forward foot of about an inch or so. That's the coiled sanchen position. Now release the coil in the way that it normally releases, and that is by finding this coiled position relaxing into the uncoiled position. Many of us unconsciously, if we're not meticulous in our stance work, will let the rear foot, the heel of the rear foot, drag inwards, which actually releases any kind of coiling in the stance. So one important and critical factor is making sure that rear heel is pressed outward. Also, if we allow the rear hip to relax too greatly, we will also be unconsciously uncoiling in our position. So the perfect Sanchin position, and I use the word perfect with some care, is simply a matter of finding where the structure produces a natural spring-like quality within the body, which is beneficial for all of the movements that we do from the Sanchin position. Now, having coiled, there are many movements in the Hojo-Indo, or the coordination exercises, that are designed to naturally coil our body into position, and then we release the coil with the strike. Let's take the Harakan, for example. When one drops the Harakan, it's an opportunity to slightly sink into that forward foot. I'm going to exaggerate the motion, not that that should be copied, but so that you can see what I'm doing. The actualization of this coiling is really very slight. It's a matter of engaging rather than exaggeration. In this position, I am naturally coiled. When I release the coil, as my arm comes out for the simultaneous block hit, there is the benefit of the coil position releasing. It's like a wind-up toy. One gains power from the coiled position releasing. So this is a very fine practice to get the coiling, uncoiling. Feel the coiled position, feel the uncoiled position. Now, you'll notice another thing, particularly with the Hirakan practice, and that is there is a natural rising with the strike and natural compression or sinking with the primary position. You won't see my body stand up, but you'll see a slight upward rising in the stance and a slight sinking. Paul Linden, an Aikidoist in Ohio, has a great way of putting it, which I rather like. He says, I sink, therefore I am. So if you'll pardon the bad humor, nevertheless, you'll get the picture. The depth of the stance is a sunk position. The expansion of the stance is using the compression of the stance and the coiling, uncoiling to strike with. You notice if we continue with the exercise, as I chamber the punch, a Hirakan fist, there is again the coiled position. As I strike out, there is a slight uncoiling. As I come in, make the next motion, I'm back into a coiled position, which again is released with the punch. At no time do I release the heels, however, so the position stays in a dynamically fixed position. I should also say that in my study of other Chinese martial arts, brief study, for example, 5 ancestor system, a number of the 5 ancestor practitioners start with the heel in and at the punch push the heel out. In Wei Yu, of course, it remains in position. Coiling, uncoiling. Coiling, uncoiling. Coiling, uncoiling. Coiling, uncoiling. Rising, sinking. Okay? Now, one of the other pairs or groups of feeling that you can explore is the aspect of opening, closing. You'll notice closing, opening. Closing, opening. Closing, opening. So one closes, one opens, one rises, one sinks, one coils, and uncoils in this particular movement set. Let's take another one, Shuto Riken Shoken. You'll notice that with the block, there is a natural closing, natural sinking. You'll feel the coiling, uncoiling, with the rotation of the hips into the coiled position and uncoiling. So there is the energy of moving into the forward leg and moving across it. The shuto. You'll notice again the openness of the strike. You'll notice again the natural coiling into the back fist. You'll notice again with the championing of the punch, the natural coiling and uncoiling. Once again, with the block, feel as you come into position, the natural sinking, feel the coiling of the sweep block into position, feel the forward rotation of the strike, the shuto, feel the riken, and how the body is compressed, goes forward, feel the expansion with the shoken. Once again. See if you can get a sense of the feeling of these movements. Another one. The elbow. The elbow is one of the great weapons, in my opinion, in Wei Yu. This position, sometimes within each of the individual positions, there is a natural coiling. This is very much like the head of a snake. We could consider these knuckles to be the fangs. You'll notice in this position that the head of the snake is ready to strike. There is a natural coiling. Indeed, this is a fine movement to play with, this rotation outward, as though the snake is striking. However, in the exercise, then that's followed by a strike that's very close to the body, as is the final one. So once again, one moves into coiling, position, strike. Each one has its different feeling of relationship of coiling, uncoiling. Notice also how my body sinks, rises, and then stays at the same level. Notice also how my body opens and closes, opening and closing, and so forth. You'll also notice that in this position, this is a compressed position. And this is an expanded position. This is an expanded, this is slightly compressed. All of which of each of these gives a different kind of hit within the series of 3 elbow strikes. You'll notice through all of this that there is some slight rotation throughout the upper part of the body. I'm greatly exaggerating what we're doing, but an exercise that will give you a feeling of looseness is actually a very traditional practice of striking the body. This is a great exercise to practice if you need anyone else to strike you. In Chinese martial arts, the translation of this series is called self-flagellation. One which I rather find appropriate, it's not amusing. I'm hitting with the flat part of the hand here. So that the hand is, I'm not hitting with the knuckles, but the hand strikes flat. To the back, it's with the top of the hand. So hitting with the bottom of the hand, top of the hand. Now, important feature is this rotation along the spinal axis. Letting the rotation take place in such a way that the stance is held firm, but the rest of the body moves upward. You will feel some slight movement, and that's an important aspect of body mechanics, is feeling the relationship between the ground and the motion itself. So for example, if we go back to those elbow strike, to pay attention to what the contact of my feet feel like with the floor as I move, will open up the movement itself. Right now, I feel a slight bit of motion at the bottom of the feet. The skin remains in contact precisely with the floor. However, there's rotation within the feet. There's a bit more within the ankle, a bit more in the knees, a bit more in the hips and pelvic area, and a bit more, of course, in the upper part of the torso, a bit more in the striking, a bit more in the fingertips, so forth. Let's try another one. Get into a right San-Chen. Roundhouse punch is one, of course, that we practice a lot. It's a natural one in terms of letting the body rotate and strike. Notice the difference in power between just keeping the body still and reaching around with the arm to hit. It's very difficult to achieve much real power or strength by isolating motions, keeping the body still and working against the motion. It would be akin to trying to hit a baseball by just swinging the bat without any body positioning or body motion. You notice when somebody goes to hit a baseball, the whole body is rotating through in order to get power. Great to study the home run kings of contemporary times to see what kind of body motion that they use. In golf, of course, one could never swing with any degree of power if the body was kept still. It's the same in karate. Keeping the body still to swing around and hit is an isolation. One of the important aspects of karate, in my view, is unifying the body so that the entire body works to help the fist. So the first way that takes place is in the feet. If you have some doubts about this, put on inline skates or ice skates. Try to hit with any power on this motion. It's very difficult because of the loss of friction at the feet. The feet must be firmly on the ground. Then also let the pelvis rotate backwards in an incorrect stance. See what happens with power there. You can feel the loss through the pelvic area. The same thing would happen if one overextends. This will look quite amusing, I'm sure, to many of you, but the hips overly, there can't be any push forward, there can't be any power. The whole body must be naturally aligned and hitting so that there is a rotation through the body. My body rotates through in support of this hit. You'll notice, again, very slowly, the gentle motion that is happening with the rotation of the spine along the spinal axis. The same kind of motion as we were doing in the body toughening, but much more subtle, and then with the intent of supporting the hit. Now, hitting on a single side is quite different than hitting with two hands. In the case of hitting with two hands, it would serve no useful purpose to turn and try to come back. In there, you'll notice the compression expansion, closed, opening, closed position that will take place. This is just one hand, however, so you can feel the rotation. Now, again, as one pulls back, I urge students to not overlook this detail of opening the hand and carving the space back into position. Hitting, opening, carving back into place. Hitting, opening, carving. So in this case, the hips are actually creating the rotation back into the coiled position as the hand pulls back. In this particular position, one is slightly extended. If you try to attempt to bring the hand back without the body, it would be very difficult. You could try that with a partner. Have somebody actually grab a hold of your arm and try to just pull the arm back. It's very difficult. It'll pull you out of your stance. But if you move the hips back simultaneously with the retraction of the hand, you'll find there's a great ease in retracting the hand into its position. Once again, coiled, releasing that coil, hitting outwards, using the hips to pull back into the stable position and the coiled position here. The unification of body throughout your karate training means that one has to inhabit their body fully. This is an unusual concept for most of us because that is assumed. In the vernacular language, we often, when we're frightened, we talk about somebody, they jump right out of their skin. In the state of fear, one actually leaves. One doesn't fully inhabit the body. It's like, well, sorry, body, if you're stuck there, I'm getting out at any rate. Van Canna's work, of course, with fear in stressful situations is very helpful here. But there is a tendency to leave one's body rather than to feel the body. Years ago, Master Tamiosi gave me some very, very good advice. He said, first, come into position, drop, sink. And he said, then you can fight. He said, up here, afraid, not knowing what to do, it's very difficult to fight. He said, even 10 years, you can barely defend yourself. But dropping, feeling the dropping. The dropping, while that takes place physically, also takes place in terms of filling the body. I fill the body. I feel and I fill. Feel and fill. Drop the body. That's the importance of the opening, of course, of all kata, where following the bow, one takes position, feels the ground, has a relationship, fills the body. Now, once the body is filled, understanding how to work the body in a way that is a benefit and of complete support of each movement is important. In the old days of Wage Ryu, and I think probably some dojos still enjoy this particular practice, dynamic tension was an important aspect of the practice. Principally, first speed katas were all done in a state of dynamic tension, and Sensei Matson's first book, The Way of Karate, for example, has a very interesting chart in which opposing muscle groups are talked about in a state of contracted motion. I would recommend, especially for those of us who are older than 20 years old, that the body not be ever used in a state of dynamic tension, but in a state of support. In this position, as you expand, for example, feel how there is natural support. That's very different than a dynamic tension. Let me demonstrate the movement from a state of dynamic tension. was is that one builds the strength through opposing muscle groups, through isometric motion. However, I would recommend that, especially those of us who are older than 20, as you practice, one simply puts the intent to expand outward with the motion. Nothing resisting, everything supporting it. Therefore, no more muscular energy is required other than to support the power of the movement. Start with a relaxed, completely relaxed, although correct position. And let the arm float up into position. As it floats upward, place yourself in the feeling that the arm starts to weigh a bit more. If the arm weighs more, we'll need more support for its motion. Notice how the musculature is engaged to support that feeling of greater weight. There's a natural heaviness in the motion. That will give you the proper feeling for the body to support the motion without dynamic tension, without excessive contractive motion. Try it on the other side. Notice what it feels like when you just initially do the motion. See what your natural way of moving the body in this simple expansion, rising, uncoiling, however you want to think about it at this particular point, how that feels. Then fill the motion more so there's a natural heaviness. And see what changes take place in the body. Now return to the other side. Same thing. Paying close attention. Try one with power and speed. Try one fully relaxed. Try one slowly. All the time feeling. In the regular punch that we do, the regular reverse punch, there was a different feeling than what we were doing with the roundhouse punch, which is over the forward foot. I'm going to turn sideways now so that you can feel and see what's happening with just the regular seiken. A number of things I want you to notice. Keep the body perfectly still and extend the arm. Feel what strength within the arm, shoulder, lats is required in order just to make that motion with any degree of strength. Gradually fill the arm more and more. Not to put it into a state of tension, but to put it in the support of heaviness. Now, as you do so, take the hip, rotate the hip just slightly with the punch. See how that increases the strength of the punch, the follow through. Remembering that the hip can take place anywhere along here, that the extended position is the follow through position. We're actually hitting anywhere through here to probably about this much rotation. The rest is merely follow through to get the penetration in the punch. Watch the hip. Now, feel the heel as you're making the strike. Feel how the heel is in support. Now, change the stance so that it's incorrect. Turn the heel in so that now we have a very relaxed stance without the San-Chen stance. Notice how there is a lack of platform of support. What you can do is have someone, a training partner, actually push against your extended fist position. See what strength there is with the heel out. See what loss of strength there is with the heel in. By virtue of that, with the hip, see what loss of strength there is with the hip rotated backward. See what loss of strength, what gain of strength there is with the hip pressing forward. So that the whole body is in support of this extension. Now, take the idea of compression, expansion. Feel this as a compressed position. Feel this as an expanded position. Compress, expand. Compress, expand. Compress, expand. In this case, since we're punching off with the rear foot, we can't use the coil. We can't use the coiling and uncoiling method. We have to use the compression, expansion. Put your attention in the fist so that when you hit and then reach full extension, your mind, your attention is placed here. After you do that, follow the heel with the heel. Keep attention here, feel attention there. So you're feeling this structural support from here all the way to the back. Do it on both sides. Notice how the hip moves very little. Shotokan karate, of course, all of the power, or most of the power, is generated, for example, within the hip rotation. And the arms move in whip-like fashion. There are a number of different martial arts that actually practice in that way. Wei Chu is a close-in distance fighting system. So it's not an advantage to move the hips more than just slightly. However, you'll find that just slight motion and rotation in the hips will greatly enhance the power of your strike. What you can do also is to have a training partner put their hand against your punch and give you resistance to the extending. When you're fully extended, have them grab your wrist and resist your retraction so that there is isotonic resistance on the expansion and there's isotonic resistance to the compressed position. Compression, expansion. Compression, expansion. Compression, expansion. And the body is able to, if you just try to pull the arm back, you'll probably pull yourself out of your stance if somebody's grabbed a hold. If you use your body to sink into the compressed position, you'll find it very easy, actually, to pull the person backwards with your strength of the whole rotation of the body. One of the Hojundo that is difficult for people is the wrist blocks. In the wrist block position, mostly people just move their arms and to make very graceful, gentle motion. Once working out in the gymnasium at the university, when I was a student, another fellow who was a black belt looked at this and didn't think it would be effective and told me so. So I asked him please to punch and hit with the inside of the wrist right here on his hand. He changed his view as to whether or not these would be effective. Now, a way of increasing their effectiveness is to recognize that within the stance, there is a forward foot and there is a rear foot. The forward foot, in this case, has the ability to give vertical support to whatever motion is occurring. The rear foot has the ability to give diagonal support. The difficult one is over the open side. When I move my right hand in a left sun chin upward, I do not have the benefit of vertical support, nor do I have the benefit of diagonal support. This is the open part of the stance. So actually, when I move in this way, I favor slightly the forward hand, as though I'm rising, sinking, coiling, uncoiling, rising, sinking, coiling, uncoiling. In the coil position, again, slight rotation, I can hit with power. Here, I can also hit with power. And dropping, this drop, using the body weight and moving into position to hit with, will greatly increase the power of your position, of your strike. Now, with both of them, you'll notice there's something else happening. Opening, closing, opening, closing, opening, closing, expansion or rising, compression, expansion, compression. Feeling how these arm movements, these wrist blocks, the power is greatly enhanced by the use of the entire body in the motion. So I do it on both sides then, to feel the result of then moving over the other foot. Power of this motion is very great. It's not so much a block as it is an attack. And whenever one wants to move in an attacking fashion, it's a great benefit to use the whole body to hit. There's a saying in Chinese martial arts, hit with the fist with power from the ground. And what that means is that the fist is merely that which makes contact. But the power of the fist is unified from the ground up through the body to its contact place. And that goes forth with any movement that one makes. This sweep block in the Wauki. You'll notice that if I keep my body straight without moving, it will be very difficult to keep a flat defense on this forward circle. I must actually, in order to keep a plane, I'll do it to the side, in order to keep a plane on this upward sweep, I must allow my body to rotate slightly and then pull back. So you see that with the body mechanics of this motion, where I talked about coiled, uncoiling back into the coiled position for structural integrity and structural strength, there is also the ability then to keep my hand out, which then allows me to defend and intercept any strike that would be occurring away from the body. With the kick, I had a number of people come to me that have had knee injuries in their kicking practice. In all cases, the hyperextension of the knee occurs by keeping the hips from moving. In other words, keeping the hip down, kicking out. I almost can't do it anymore. But the hip is kept down, and then the kick comes out. That has the disadvantage of then having the kick reach its full extension by compacting at the knee joint. What I would recommend for practicing kicks is, as we all know from the Jumbi Undo, this exercise where the hip is actually raised. We raise each hip. This is the primary beginning of the kick, getting this hip to rotate upward naturally while the other foot stays on the ground. So the mechanics of the kick are as follows. Bringing that hip up and through, as well as the knee, and as well as the foot. So if we were to do that slow motion, getting the power of the kick from the hip, as though the hip is raising up, the knee is raising up, and the leg is extending forward. Now, as we practice this, feel how your weight has to shift. When we talk about centering, the dantian is never fixed. It is not a fixed position which is invariable throughout all of the movements. We allow that to move within, shall we say, a restricted fashion, so that it doesn't, of course, we don't rise up. How many times have those of us seen martial arts magazines where somebody is kicking up on the ball of their foot? Anybody who ever gets hit by a kick like that need not worry. The person will probably fall over as one does that. The foot must stay firm. Nevertheless, the center is not the same as it would be for a strike from the arm or punch, whatever. It must rise up to lift up off the ground. So there again, rising, sinking, rising, sinking, rising, sinking. This comes up, this is released for the kick. No injuries will occur with kicking in this fashion. The other added advantage is, and you can try this on your own, is the greater reach of the leg with the hip. Perhaps from the side, if I keep my hips down, you can see the reach. Let the hip rotate up. And it changes greatly. I would practice loosening up the hips, getting the hips in the Jumiundo to release, to move. Another wonderful exercise which you can do on your own, I call it one of the cold mountain tortures, is simply to put your position, the kicking position here, lift the hip down, hip up, down, 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 up, down. And you can do as many repetitions as you can stand. That's a very good one for gaining control over that. It's the same as working with the roundhouse kicks. The same thing, except that one pivots the rear foot quite strongly at the same time. Hip comes up as the pivot occurs. So that's another one that bears a lot of repetition. Not even worrying about the extension of the kick, but getting the mechanics of the hip movement irrespective of the extension. And then when you add the extension, you'll find a greater degree of power. I want to work a bit on the dantian now. In the sanchen position, I want you to feel this area. Unification of the body can only take place if one can be attentive and mindful and mindfully aware of the entire body. If there's any part of the body that you do not feel, that's where you must deliberately take your intention. If I digress for a moment, in doing any of the toe exercises that I like to do, that's probably the most difficult for most people because they've never had to think about moving their toes with any degree of deliberation. Moving the toes takes time. As I put it, it's the furthest extension from the brain. It's a long ways down. If you can nevertheless, feel the toes and pulling into a toe fist. That will help your feeling there. Now, in your Sancho position, the dantian, simply put the hands on the dantian. Begin to just be fully aware of that particular place. Now, practice the hiss and feel the expansion here. In all of these, of course, you can work with the fingertips, strengthening the fingertips, working on the breathing. This is the most effective way to develop an awareness of this particular part of the body. If you have difficulty then with what's called the middle dantian in Chinese Qigong practice, the solar plexus. One learns to put attention there. Sides of the body. The back of the body, the lower back. Dantian strength is critical to feeling the expansion of motion, of movement from the center. Now, here's another exercise that I would like to have you try. Put both your hands out as though you've done the double strike at the completion of San Chen. Stretch out, squeeze, pull back. Leave your hands out, different than the kata. And feel the dantian move. Pull back. Feel it there. Out. Do it in the Waoki position. Developing this, the center of our body, is will greatly enhance your karate. I once worked with an advanced black belt who I felt was insufficient here, so I actually gave him a pillow, which I stuffed in his gi. I called it a dantian prosthesis, to help him feel this area of the body, which actually turned out to be very successful. I don't know that I recommend any surgical procedures. However, if you can get this so that you're feeling this part of the body, as my friend and colleague Arthur Rabisa said, he said, weightlifting is not very good for bikinis. One must work developing strength here and develop a model where this is full. Having said that, and being from Canada, I also don't advocate overuse of fine beer to achieve it. That won't work either. It must be active. You must work it with the activity of expansion, and the breathing is the primary way of doing that. Now, we can contrast that for your own experimentation by taking yourself out of the dantian. Try following the beautiful military model of a fine, fit body by inhaling and contracting this entire area. Try to see what power there is in the punch where this is gone. Where I have to pull my belt up now. You can see the body is, it looks lovely, but you'll find that if you do that, there's a loss, a great loss of power. There's a loss of contact with the floor, and there's a loss of power in the movements. Even if I press down, it's still very hard for me to move with any degree of strength. Also, in terms of taking a strike to the body cannot be struck without hazard if the abdominal area is contracted inward. Now, on the other hand, one does not press it out to make a pot belly, but the body is very barrel-like. There's a natural barrel-like shape in the expansion of the dantian, the diaphragmatic muscles coming into contact to also help expand the body. Finally, let's take one more of the coordination exercises to play with. And I'm going to do this one from the side. And that's the double fingertip strike. In my study of other Chinese martial arts, one martial art that bears great similarity to Wei Chu and the way the body is used is Xin Yi. And Xin Yi has a great use of the heel. You'll notice that when I do this strike, I allow the heel to come in on the sliding step with some degree of power. And the timing, if I go slowly, is the hit and strike only much closer together than that. As though the power from this hit goes right up through my fingertips. So forth. Something to play with there. On all of the sliding steps, I use the stance, I use the heel to help achieve power. The Mawashiyuki also, I'd like to talk about before the tape ends. With a double strike, one winds and coils slightly into the forward foot. I'll exaggerate it. Now, I'll do it as it should be done. Same thing goes for all stationary double strikes. To just review before the tape ends, two primary aspects of body mechanics: attention and intention. Realize that the purpose of these body mechanics is to integrate the body to help aid the impact of your strikes, to help make the movements more efficient, to help a greater economy of motion to be effective. Remember that the basic principles are, first of all, coiling into that forward foot. For double strikes, as I did there at the following, whether it's a Mawashiyuki or any of the other strikes, remember that the coiling aids in the release of the strike. So the coil position and the power of the strike go together. The spring releases and the power releases. Remember that also there is a natural sinking. My great corny pun. I sink, therefore I am. That'll help you remember it, for sure. I sink. Then I strike. Compress. Expand. If you watch behind my rear leg, you'll see the enforced position of that extension. It's not a movement without that. There is a natural forward thrust of the body with the hip. Compression, expansion. Opening, closing. Opening, closing. Opening, closing, opening, closing. Rising, sinking. Coiling, uncoiling. Compression, expansion, coiling, uncoiling, opening, closing, rising, and sinking. If you can truly feel these aspects of the movement, you'll find your karate will have a greater integration, a greater enjoyment. I think you'll find that it will enhance all of your karate, and that's my hope.